Gita talks about it can't be burnt, it can't be drenched, it can't be, you can't pierce with it. These are not figures of speech. You will see this is a regular experience. But this is not an experience of the mind. We somehow give too much importance to the mind and think if the mind doesn't understand something, it can't be true. All that the mind has to do for a while is to shut up and let the other parts of your being grow. And when the drama is ready, the mind will be invited. You please come. We are not saying your mind has to be, buried and ignored. But all that we are saying is there are other parts of a man's being, they have to grow. And once the growth is complete, then the mind itself will see this. Once that realization is accomplished, all intellectual questions for or against the immortality of the soul fall away like a vain clamor of ignorance around the self-evident and ever-present truth. That is the true dynamic belief in immortality when it becomes to us not an intellectual dogma but a fact as evident as the physical fact of our breathing and as little in need of proof or argument. You will not ask for any argument, you will not ask for any proof once you have that experience. So also there comes a time when the soul becomes aware of itself in its eternal and mutable movement. Sri Aurobindo has a concept of timeless eternity and time eternity. You have to have an experience of, or is this, I am starting something new at so close to the lunch time. Is that what is happening? Okay, I can go on, right? Okay. So what I'm, only 11, but somehow from the face of the people it looked as if I'm very close to lunchtime. Okay. So what I'm saying is he has this notion of a timeless eternity and time eternity. Now, timeless eternity, he explains that there are two kinds of experiences. One is that you have the awareness that there is some part of you which never dies, which never gets old, which is never suffers any decrease or blemish. That's timeless eternity. There is another kind of eternity where as you go through life, as you go through the becoming, my present life is a becoming of my soul. As you go through life, you know this is a becoming of a soul. The awareness, this is the manifestation of a soul. That my soul has become this constant awareness is there. So even if you come here 25 times or 50 times, you see, if you have only the awareness of your timeless eternity, you will say, Punarapi Jaranam, Punarapi Maranam, I don't want this life. I think us here, see, most of the time assumption is, God is a mischief monger. He created a terrible world and sent us here. And we are slightly smarter than God. What is it? We want to stop this game and go back. Cooperate with him, we want to continue here. And if one tool doesn't do the job, you take another tool. If one set of, circumstances, whatever it take you for some distance, be grateful, and if it is not adequate, he wants to take you another set of circumstances, another birth, maybe in Africa, maybe in Switzerland, come back and be prepared and be happy. It is this that they were talking about, that if you look at this, then you will realize that that kind of an experience does not make the whole life or this world such a burden that, coming back again is a terrible thing. Lying for 9 months in the mother's womb is a terrible thing. How do you know it's a terrible thing? Who remembers 9 months in the mother's womb? Just tell me. The poet, of course, says that it must be a terrible thing. In Janani's Jatare, you live in the womb of the mother. All that I'm saying is, this is the whole philosophy, spiritual philosophy has the underlying assumption that this manifestation is a mistake. And what Sri Aurobindo wants to correct is the bad long impression. This manifestation is not a mistake. It is here for the delight of the Supreme Being. The delight is not felt at the moment. That doesn't mean he made a mistake. Here, the growth is through self-finding. This is by self-finding. You find more and more of yourself as you grow one life to another life. And there is no limit to this self-finding. This is what the game is all about. And so, he talks about immortality, which is an experience. And there he talks about two kinds of immortality. And these two have to be, you see, as a corollary to this true immortality, our spirit's timelessness, there exists as a natural consequence another kind of immortality, which can be described as time immortality. Time immortality. The realization of timeless immortality comes by the knowledge of self in the non-birth and non-becoming, and of the changeless spirit within us. The realization of time immortality comes by the knowledge of self in the birth and in the becoming. I have become Mr. Nadkarni. I had a birth, I had this life, but I know somewhere deep within me, this is a part of a journey, and this is one phase of it. I am unfazed about whatever happens to me because I know I have made this journey before and I am going to continue on this journey afterwards. In the midst of our aspiration for physical immortality, we must never lose sight of the fact that the real and true immortality for the individual is this eternity of the spirit and the immortality of the soul. The physical survival could only be relative, terminable at will, a temporal sign of the spirit's victory over death and matter. See, now what happens? Death dictates when you should die. If the spirit were strong, the spirit should say, now, enough. Enough is enough. I don't think anybody would like to be in the same body forever and ever. Mother has a beautiful explanation. What happens? In fact, there is also true, you will see later, that when one takes to the life of yoga, your mother says someplace, when you take to the life of yoga, in some cases the chances of the person falling ill, he begins to fall ill more frequently than ordinary people. Why is this? Why does this happen? There are mysteries, and the mother has commented on all these things. And if you understand this mystery, you will understand the mystery of this life and the mystery that we have to understand. So, I'm looking at the watch whether the mystery should be kept a mystery or... No, you see, this is not very easy material, so I am kind of apprehensive whether I will continue for a little while. Okay. The sadhak of the integral life seeks release from all egoistic sense of identification with the body, heart and mind, and after having the double realization, as I talked about, of timeless eternity and time immortality, he does not stop there, nor does he seek to withdraw from the field of terrestrial becoming. The lure of the night and the eternal repose of sleep, the nirvanic extinction, this has been for many a seeker the motivation of the spiritual pursuit. Buddha even declared that to exist itself is to suffer. To exist is to suffer. And Buddha ultimately said the world, there is a one single mistake at the root of this world, and that is the world is born out of desire. And as long as there is desire, there is no permanent solution to any of our problems. Vedanta thinks it is not desire what is at the root of this being is God's bliss. But then you have to connect, if the origin is God's bliss, how is it right now we are going through a phase when bliss is not available even in black market? Where is bliss in life? Life seems to be such a field of torture and happiness, misery and so on. And why is this so? Now, these are all problems that Sri Aurobindo has explained so beautifully in the Life Divine. There are a number of things that one sees. For example, all spiritual practice says, conquer your anger, conquer your greed, conquer your lust, conquer your desire, conquer the 8 enemies that you have, otherwise you have no future, there is no future life. Kathopanishad says that, the Gita is again and again and again says this. True. But then an agnostic may turn around and say, why did God create all these things and captured us in this? True, we must get over lust, anger, desire, greed. But I didn't choose desire, I didn't choose this lust, I didn't choose this greed. And these are all around, I am caught in them for no fault of mine. And then I am supposed to get out of it. Why was it created? In other words, the question is, if there is suffering in life, if there is pain in life, if there is sin in life, I am not responsible for it, I am only a victim of it. God is responsible for it, and a Hindu God cannot exonerate himself from this responsibility, because we have only one God. We don't have a convenient Satan who comes and spoils the game of God. In other religions, God is responsible for all the good things. We have a Satan who is responsible for all the bad things. And the Satan is like the cousin of our ministers. Ministers do want to do all good to the world, but the cousin is a corrupt fellow, so he spoils it. Being a cousin, the God can't do much to him. He is a cousin after all. So all philosophies look for a corrupt cousin for God. The only philosophy, only vision that doesn't look for a corrupt cousin for God is our philosophy. Ultimately, the buck stops here. Where does it stop? At the door of God himself. Why did you create this? And the most beautiful thing about the Life Divine is that Sri Aurobindo is the only one who has explanation why God had to create this. And so, if you remember, when we are doing book 6, Narad and Savitri's mother, the confrontation, Savitri's mother asked this very question. Savitri is so innocent. Savitri has not harmed anybody. But why is she visited with all this suffering and pain? What has she done? And so Narad willy-nilly had to explain to her why pain comes, why suffering comes, why is it that as we are going through this particular region of growth, all these things have to be there. All these things is explained philosophically in the Life Divine, but he has explained also briefly in terms of poetry in that canto 2 of book 6. It's a wonderful canto. And then again he goes on to say why all the avatars, all the great men in this world, if you look at their biographical evidence, you will see they had more suffering that came to their lot than happiness. Why is it so? All this is being talked about there, but here he says it is one-sided view to say that this whole world is nothing but suffering, and therefore the best course for us is to seek release from this world. We need a philosophy which says if there is suffering, this is not an essential part of this world. This is simply a passing circumstance. What is it that makes this necessary? All this he has explained in the Life Divine. I don't think We need to go to the life divine from here, so that will be walking backwards instead of going forward. But once again, I would like to remind you and also emphasize that those of you who want to take up Savitri seriously, if you want anything as collateral reading, it is the life divine. Because there many of these notions are very clearly articulated by Sri Aurobindo. So I'll bring this to a conclusion and we'll take up the next phase of this theme. This is a very large theme: death, immortality, what is the real issue, what is the false issue, and so on. This kind of world disgust cannot be the attitude of the sadhak of integral yoga. We keep away from bad things not because we find them all disgusting. We simply, we have a different reason. For him, death has to be transcended in order that life may be divinely fulfilled. This becoming being more progressive and evolutionary, the present spectacle of life afflicted with the load of suffering and death cannot be the last act of the drama. Right now, man's life is so limited, man's life is so cut everywhere. Man cannot be the highest product of this evolutionary creation. There has to be another stage. Man himself has to reach that stage when man can say, the Vedas say, how did this world come out? The world came out when God said, I want to be many. When he said, God, I want to be many, he didn't mean I wanted to be the lame many, the blind many, the dead many, the weak many, etc. He said, I want to be many, such that in each one of the many, I will manifest my richness, my beauty, my glory, my perfection. Where is it? Where is this perfection now? This perfection is inner. Now, manifestation is not about inner perfection. Manifestation is about outer perfection. Manifestation is for the material perfection which is tangible. And so, it is not enough to say, I have God within me, I have got bliss within me, I have got immortality within me, I have got deathlessness within me. This is all subjective. What we need is a perfection of life which is outer as well. And that's the journey, that's the yoga, that's the struggle. And that's why he says that death has to be conquered as a sure sign of the being's victory in the field of becoming. The spirit that is growing in us will not tolerate any kind of limitation on it from any other force. Like the spark of God, and God has immortality, and it is the birthright of the spirit that we have in us here to be immortal in that sense, and this is not a clinging to the body, it's not a material clinging, it is a sign of the triumph of the spirit over all material limitations. This is what Sri Aurobindo and the mother meant by immortality, but not this kind of clinging to the carcass, the body that is remaining at the age of 96, 97. That's not what we mean. We'll talk about this, continue to talk about this maybe for some more time tomorrow. Now, one word. Today is Saturday. We don't... a little event that happened this morning, which you should know about, which has had some effect on the planning of this program for the next 4 or 5 days. A good friend of mine accosted me as usual, jovial at heart and so on. And the first thing he said, look what you have done. I said, what have I done? It has been raining since midnight yesterday. I didn't understand the relationship with the rain and what I had done. He said, all your 1 hour long talk yesterday of time eternity and timeless eternity went on and on with so much vapor and gas and so on. The clouds had to be formed, and once the clouds get formed, they have to rain. This has been going on.
That is the grace.
Well, there must be some margin of truth in what he is saying. And so what I have decided is, each day, because one of the things we plan to do during this course is to discover what Sri Aurobindo and the mother have said about death, which is something very little known. And there are all kinds of misconceptions, misunderstandings, and at least those of us who regard ourselves as devotees, disciples of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, should rid ourselves of all these wrong notions. And so that's why yesterday I launched on this detailed kind of discussion of what is the real issue of immortality, what is it that is all about, etc. But since I heard this little joke my friend told me, I think what I will do during the first half, I will go back to the text, because that's also, we have two more cantos, a whole book we have to read, which is book 9. And after tea, coffee, juice, whatever you get, if you still feel enthused, you can come back and listen to the story that I started yesterday. So you have a choice, right? So I will do the first thing now, and then later on add on to what I said yesterday. What is the real issue about immortality and death and so on? Okay, so that's the change of plan. So next 2-3 days, the first half will be devoted to a study of the text, and the second half, if I find the need to dwell on some of the pertinent ideas, the salient ideas about what Sri Aurobindo and the mother have said about death and immortality. We saw in book 8, which consists only of one canto, that Satyavan's life ultimately had ebbed away, and we left him on the ground, with his head resting in Savitri's lap. And from there on, this is book 9. As I pointed out, book 9 did receive considerable revision at Sri Aurobindo's hands. This is no more what it was in 1916, whether book 8 was more or less what it was in 1916, except for a few changes and a few additional lines. But this canto itself hasn't undergone any extensive revision compared to other parts of the book. As I told you, canto 4 in book 10 has been expanded 18 times what it was in 1916. This has not undergone that kind of an expansion, but it is now twice as long as it was in the earlier version, which is considerable improvement and change. So, the Book of Eternal Light, Book 9, Canto 1, Towards the Black Void. So was she left alone in the huge wood, surrounded by a dim, unthinking world, her husband's corpse on her forsaken breast. So she was left all alone in the huge wood. Suddenly, as she bent down to press her lips on Satyavan's lips had ceased to respond, and his head, as it were, moved away, and it was resting against her golden arm. That's how the poet describes it. So she was left alone in the huge wood, surrounded by a dim, unthinking world. Naturally, in that forest, the only thinking beings are, of course, Savitri and Satyavan. Now Satyavan also is gone, and there is the other presence, which is the god of death, and Savitri deliberately doesn't take note of him yet. So she is not, because if you suddenly take note of him and stand up in reverence and regard, god of death, please come in, and so on, he doesn't. She just is indifferent to him for a long, long time. So she was left alone in the huge wood, surrounded by a dim, unthinking world, her husband's corpse on her forsaken breast. The word corpse here is very peculiar. He hadn't used this word earlier on. He gives in these 3 lines, you get a kind of a picture of a pathetic being sitting there all alone. And the whole world is going on, the forest continues as ever, the birds keep chirping as ever, frolicking as ever, the sun goes down. Death affects an individual person a great deal. But the world goes on. The world doesn't say, doesn't stop by and, say much about it. It goes on. And so you feel as if you were totally an insignificant, small being somewhere. And that's the kind of these three lines, at least to me, Sri Aurobindo is considerably scaled down his elevated style here. It's almost reads like to me lines from some modern poetry. It's as bare, as simple as that. The purpose simply this is deliberate. He wants to give us the idea how helpless, how lonely, how all alone Savitri was, and he says, so was she left alone in the huge wood. It's not forest. He had all these grand words, but now it is simply huge wood. Wood is the word he uses. Surrounded by a dim, unthinking world. Her husband's corpse, the corpse is the word he uses now. It's of course a corpse because the life had deserted, left that body on her forsaken breast. She was forsaken by love, by everything, and it is there. In her vast, silent spirit, motionless, she measured not her loss with helpless thoughts, nor rent with tears the marble seals of pain. She rose not yet to face the dreadful God. She has not yet taken any note of the dreadful God, although she knows, she is aware that she is somewhere behind her, by the side of her. In her vast, silent spirit, motionless. One characteristic feature of Savitri now, she doesn't get agitated. Whatever the world may think of her, the world may think poor Savitri left all alone to her own devices, but she is unperturbed. Her spirit remains motionless. Silent spirit, motionless. She measured not her loss with helpless thoughts. She did not busy herself thinking a helpless thought. So how helpless we are in the face of death. Now what can I do? Who can help me? None of that at all. No self-pity, no complaint. She measured not her loss with helpless thoughts, nor rent with tears the marble seals of pain. The seals of pain that death had put on her being, she didn't try to tear them off by shedding tears. There were no tears, no complaint, no wailing, no self-pity. She rose not yet to face the dreadful God. She was quiet, she was silent, she was observing, watching. Over the body she loved, her soul leaned out in a great stillness without stir or voice. The body was lying there, her soul, as it were, bent over and enveloped Satyavan's body. Over the body she loved, her soul leaned out in a great stillness without stir or voice, without stirring, without making any unnecessary movement, and without speaking, without letting anything escape her mouth, as if her mind had died with Satyavan. That it looked as if a part of her being had frozen with the departure of Satyavan. Some part, her heart was still alive, her love was still alive, and with that, as it were, it looked as if she was trying to envelop Satyavan. Over the body she loved, her soul leaned out in a great stillness without stir or voice, as if her mind had died with Satyavan, but still the human heart in her beat on. The human heart in her continued to beat on. There was no reaction from the mind, no reaction from any other part of her being, but her heart was poignant. But still the human heart in her beat on, aware still of his being near to hers, aware still of his heart, Satyavan's heart, being still near to hers. Closely she clasped to her the mute, lifeless form. She clasped the mute, lifeless form close to her heart, as though to guard the oneness they had been and keep the spirit still within its frame. It felt as if now Savitri had clasped it firmly against her chest, trying as if she was trying to hold back her soul or spirit which was trying to leave the body. She was not letting it go. That's the kind of firmness. That's all. I mean, it's impossible. Savitri knows the soul can't be held like this, but that is what the poet sees and describes. Aware still of his being near to hers, of his heart being near to hers, closely she clasped to her the mute, lifeless form, as though to guard the oneness they had been, and keep the spirit still within its frame. Then, suddenly, there came on her the change which in tremendous moments of our lives can overtake sometimes the human soul and hold it up towards its luminous source. Sometimes the most crucial moments of our lives, something happens, something as it were takes possession of our being. The little individuals that we are, the miserable wretches that we are, the two-legged worms that we are, that's what many people regard human life as, that seems to disappear for a while, and a great powerful being takes possession of us and makes us do things. And these are great moments, and the little person recedes, and the great reality we really are steps forward, uses our mind, uses our hands, uses our body for a purpose determined by it. So that kind of a moment now came over Savitri. Then suddenly there came on her the change which in tremendous moments of our lives, these changes do not overtake us, the ordinary moments of our life, the most challenging moments of our life, when the whole life is being shaken, as it were, by an earthquake or a volcano, and our normal resources can't handle the situation. That time, which in tremendous moments of our lives can overtake sometimes the human soul and hold it up towards its luminous source. This has, you can see, is this can overtake sometimes the human soul and hold it up towards its. Then suddenly there came on her the change which in tremendous moments of our lives can overtake sometimes the human soul and hold it up towards its luminous source. In the lives of great people, in the lives of great avatars, these moments do come. And I guess legends are made out of these moments. There must be something equivalent to Krishna raising the Govardhan on his little finger. I don't think literally he did that, but something superhuman he must have been able to do at that moment. And then poet's imagination over several centuries has dwelt on it. I don't know what actually he lifted, but they made it a whole mountain. And again, it's a little finger. I said if he had used both his hands and lifted the mountain, that would have been a little more credible. But what I am trying to say is there are these moments that come over people's lives, particularly people like Savitri. Savitri is not an ordinary human being. She is an avatar. When avatar has to perform what she really has come here, she can't do it with only her human resources. The human being is only the front. Behind her, the great power. And that power suddenly takes over. And Savitri is only a kind of camouflage. It's only the front. But behind this face, behind this figure, what is functioning is her real being. And in her case, in Savitri's case, the real being behind Savitri is the Supreme Divine Mother herself. It is the Aditi herself. And this is what can overtake sometimes the human soul and hold it up towards its luminous source. The luminous source from which we come. I talked about the psychic being the other day. Psychic being an emanation, a projection of the Jivatman. And the Jivatman is a spark, as it were, of the divine conflagration, of the divine fire. Now, in Savitri's case, it is not just a spark. Savitri is an emanation, is a projection, is what we call an avatar of the Supreme Divine Mother herself. So, in a lower order of beings, sometimes our psychic being is directly in contact with the Jivatman that we really are. So, all the divine spark, grace, beauty, whatever is reflected in us. In Savitri's case, it is the Supreme Mother herself. So, and hold it up towards its luminous source. There was this contact that took place at this moment because the shock of this terrible event, the shock of this great tragedy that Satyavan wasn't there anymore. Satyavan had died, although Savitri was preparing for this day, but the event when it took place had this effect, rocked the whole being of Savitri. It's true that on her surface she looked quite quiet, without any motion, without any perturbation, but somewhere deep within her she was greatly shocked, and this shock in her case brought about this effect that suddenly a veil was lifted which is between her being, surface being, and her inner being, and her surface being came into contact with this luminous source behind her. Then suddenly there came on her the change which in tremendous moments of our lives can overtake sometimes the human soul and hold it up towards its luminous source. The veil is torn, the thinker is no more, only the spirit sees, and all is known. The thinker in us, whom we trust so much, in fact, is the one who creates all this illusion and mischief. The thinker is one who hides from us the face of the reality. It's only when the thinker withdraws, when the spirit sees directly. Normally, in our case, in your case, what happens is the spirit in us tries to look at the world through the mind. And mind is a medium which refracts the light of reality. Refraction, it doesn't reflect it, it refracts it. I mean, the truth is to that extent, by each mind, perverted or distorted. Mind has this capacity. Mind takes only that much of the truth which it can handle. So ultimately, mind is not a kind of transparent medium through which we can perceive truth. Mind distorts it. And that's why as long as you use the mind, you cannot see the reality as it is. Only when the mind is suppressed. That's why all these people say go above the mind, go beyond the mind. Then you can see what the world is. As long as you use the mind, you will see the world not as it is, but the world as it is created by your mind. The world that we see around us is not the real world. It's a world created by our mind. That's why in serious spiritual sadhana, in serious spiritual pursuit, the annihilation of the world created by the mind, which is called nirvana, is a necessary stage. What is wrong with this generally is people think that's the last stage. It is not the last stage, but it's a necessary stage. So, this mind which creates the world and creates a false world, I'm not saying false in the usual sense, but distorts the world, that has now, the veil is torn, the thinker is no more, only the spirit sees, and all is known. All is known. This being can immediately perceive, take stock of the situation, what has happened. When Savitri looks at it, it is Satyavan is dead, my husband is dead, etc., etc. This is not the fact, there is something else, and that has to be seen, and Savitri has to act accordingly, impersonally. To be able to act impersonally, she requires great resources of her inner being, and therefore this perception is necessary. Then a calm power seated above our brows is seen, unshaken by our thoughts and deeds. Its stillness bears the voices of the world, immobile, it moves nature, looks on life. When you read Savitri, very often you wonder if only you were a yogi yourself, you would see what these various things are. And if you are not very much of a yogi, you have very often to use your imagination or whatever you have read in Sri Aurobindo's life and the mother's life and so on, and try to get what probably the poet wants to convey. But in all these cases, you can never be 100% sure. So all that I would like to say again and again. This is my reading of Savitri. This is not necessarily the correct or the true or the authorized reading. This is the way I am reading it. And so he says, there is this calm power. This is calm power is seated in the Agya chakra. This is the Agya chakra, which is the chakra between the brows here. And this is the chakra of thought and will. Thought and will together operate from this. This is a great power, is saying unshaken by our thoughts and deeds. Savitri feels a great power dwelling here has now started looking at the word. On top of this, all that remains is the Sahasrara. There is no other chakra between these two. So that's fairly high, and it's looking at the world. Its stillness bears the voices of the world. It's so still that you feel the world and its commotion is supported by this stillness. Immobile, it moves nature, looks on life. That is, nothing perturbs it, nothing creates even a ripple in it, but it is so powerful. Its presence is so powerful. That kind of a presence Savitri feels that seated here. Now, this is the Agya Chakra, and the connection is the deity of the Agya Chakra is supposed to be is called Shambhu, and the abode of Shambhu is what is called the Maharloka, and the Maharloka is the world of the supramental. So, in other words, whatever the power that now Savitri feels here operating, Sri Aurobindo is suggesting, because for Savitri now, the supramental power is not any alien. She has already experienced it, as we saw in Canto 5 of Book 7, you know. She felt she was Brahma and Vishnu and all those, remember those lines? These are the quaternary powers of the supramental. She had this identification with all these powers. So now, Savitri is getting ready for her life's work. And whatever tapasya she has done, whatever powers she has gained, they must now be put to use. That's why she had done all this tapasya. She had not done this tapasya just for herself. She had done this tapasya so that when the time comes, she could use this power. And now is the time, the greatest challenge of her life. The god of death has come and defied her to do her worst. Look, I am doing my job. See what you can do about it. And my job is, as destined, as foretold, Satyavan's life I have taken. Now you do your. Now our brows is seen, unshaken by our thoughts and deeds. Its stillness bears the voices of the world. Yet immobile, it moves nature, looks on life. It shapes immutably its far-seen ends, untouched and tranquil amid error and tears, and measureless above our striving will. Its gaze controls the turbulent whirl of things. It shapes immutably its far-seen end. The filter of the intuitive mind and the illumined mind, the higher mind, the other minds, the vital, the physical. These are all the filters through which the supermind acts. But the action, the creativity comes from the supermind. And therefore it sees, it shapes immutably its far-seen ends. Whatever has to happen someday, all this is seen very clearly by this power, untouched and tranquil amid error and tears. Now, in this process, when fate, as it were, destiny, as it were, unfolds, and the drama is being enacted over centuries and thousands of years, and millenniums take place, go on and on. But the power seated there doesn't get impatient, doesn't lose. He quietly is confident that things are going to come up right ultimately. And therefore, she says, it untouched and tranquil amid error and tears, and measureless above our striving wills. Its reach, its poise is far beyond our striving wills. Its gaze controls the turbulent whirl of things. By mere gaze, it can control all that is turbulent in our life. To mate with the glory it sees. What is its purpose? Its purpose is to create a world here which mates the glory of the Supreme. The glory of the Supreme has to be manifested here on this earth. That is the basic objective of the supramental consciousness. That perfection that this world has to be able to manifest one day. That is, the world created by God has to mate the glory of God Himself, had to duplicate, as it were, has to manifest the complete glory, complete fulfillment of God in this created world. That's what it wants to do. To mate with the glory it sees, the spirit grows. The voice of life is tuned to infinite sound. As a result, there is a variety of motives and impulsions driving life. There are various kinds of impulsions. God doesn't seem to have a single-minded obsession. If you read Sri Aurobindo's writings, he knows exactly what is happening. For example, there came a stage when God was denied, materialism was triumphant, churches were being closed, etc., etc. Reason became the arbiter, the ultimate God. And you read Sri Aurobindo, the way he looks at it, he says this is a necessary phase. Before a healthy spirituality can emerge, humanity has to go through a stage of skepticism and doubt and agnosticism and denial of God and materialism. This experience is necessary. For having gone through this experience, the next stage that we come into, the stage of spirituality, will be genuine. So there are various impulsions to life. We are kind of single track people, and therefore so the world is going down, 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 down. We had an idea of Satya Yuga when nobody told any lie. Everybody was Raja Harishchandra. The divine is building up an orchestra with innumerable instruments, innumerable motives, innumerable voices. And we say, oh, this is too much for us, too great a variety for us. All of them have their own truth, and each has to grow and get rid of its imperfections. And once all these grow, the perfection they will arrive at will be such a perfection you and I won't have any idea. So, in the supramental consciousness, whenever it comes, you will find all truths which now look opposing to each other are all complementary. Oh, we thought, what fools we were. We thought they were all enemies. They are not enemies. They are all friends. This is all makes for this tremendously wonderful pattern that is going to emerge. And therefore he says, this life here has a variety of motives and impulsions. The voice of life is tuned to infinite sounds, not one or two. There are infinite sounds to which life is tuned. The moments on great wings of lightning come, and then there are these important moments. They come, as it were, on wings of lightning, what we call revolutions, great changes, when the transcendental supreme, as it were, descends. We don't know how he descends. There are great descriptions of this. Sri Aurobindo gives in Savitri what happens. So all these things happen, and godlike thoughts surprise the mind of earth. Suddenly, godlike thoughts crop up, as it were, several minds at the same time. These godlike thoughts are not a monopoly of any one person. That's about the time when Sri Aurobindo was talking about the supramental. Other parts of the world, similar thoughts also were being expressed. Something of that kind, not as fully, as completely, etc., as what Sri Aurobindo has done, but similar things were being talked about. The whole notion of a new consciousness and a new man is not limited and restricted to Pondicherry. It may not be found elsewhere in India, but there are other parts of the world where there is an insistent seeking for a new consciousness, a new man. They are not able to define it as well as Sri Aurobindo has defined. The only difference is, here is somebody who has actually dealt with this whole program, whole agenda with his life, and exactly knows what's going to happen. But this is a universal cry. And everywhere, the godlike thoughts surprise the mind of earth. Into the soul's splendor and intensity, a crescent of miraculous birth is tossed, whose horn of mystery floats in a bright void. Suddenly, into the soul's splendor and immensity, a possibility of a new manifestation is felt. Into the soul's splendor and intensity, a crescent of miraculous birth is tossed. A kind of a moon, a crescent rises with a new possibility, the new manifestation, whose horn of mystery floats in a bright void. As into a heaven of strength and silence, thought is ravished. All this living mortal clay is seized, and in a swift and fiery flood of touch is shaped by a harmonist unseen. When this happens, when the moment comes, when the time is right, then he says, into a heaven of strength and silence, thought is ravished. Thought is possessed, overpowered by heaven of strength and silence. All this living mortal clay is seized, and in a swift and fiery flood of touches, shaped by a harmonist unseen, a new sight comes, new voices in us form, a body of the music of the gods, a celestial pattern of music is going to emerge. These are moments, that a similar moment is now coming into the life of Savitri. This Savitri, whatever she is doing now, she is not doing for herself. This is not a single woman's battle to save her domestic happiness and domestic bliss. She represents the whole of humanity. And this fight that she has with the god of death represents man seeking for perfection. Death is a blot on the freedom of our spirit. That has to be conquered. It's not that we want that body to last forever and ever. You will see later on some people who have done research in what will happen if man has to have the same body for 200 years. It's not that we are after. Immortality is not clinging to a body. Immortality is a sign that the body, the spirit must so conquer matter that spirit must have the freedom, like in any other case, that when you have enough of a body, you just be able to say, I don't want this shirt. Vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya, the Gita says, just as you, this has only become figurative now. What is figurative now has to be literal. We should all be in control of Ichha Mrityu. That's the time when you really see that God is alive here on earth. That's where towards which we are going. And whatever Savitri is doing here is not, as I said, is not for her own personal sake. It's not as if she is looking for personal bliss. This is a kind of a symbolic act, and that is why Sri Aurobindo says now what is happening to Savitri is not so simple, a simple act, but this is symbolic. It's a very important step, as he says. This is a celestial pattern of music comes, and new harmonies will arise out of it and all that. Immortal yearnings without name leap down, large quiverings of Godhead seeking run, and weave upon a puissant field of calm, a high and lonely ecstasy of will. All this is a description of the importance of this moment and what kind of a world this moment will ultimately bring in. This, in a moment's depth, was born in her. In one moment, all this was born in her. Now to the limitless gaze disclosed that sees things barred from human thinking, earthly lids, the spirit who had hidden in nature soared out of his luminous nest within the worlds. Like a vast fire, it climbed the skies of night. Thus were the cords of self-oblivion torn. Like one who looks up, so far heights she saw, to far heights she saw, ancient and strong as on a windless summit. Above her, where she had worked in her lone mind, laboring apart in a soul tower of self, the source of all which she had seemed or wrought. a power projected into cosmic space, a slow embodiment of the ionic will, a starry fragment of the eternal truth, the passionate instrument of an unmoved power. Savitri now realizes she is not just a human being, she is a passionate instrument of an unmoved power. She thought she was just a woman and so on, but now she suddenly realizes she is an instrument. A power wants to use her, and that is described. Thus were the cords of self-oblivion torn. All the self-oblivion, Savitri, whatever had forgotten about her real being, her real status, the real reason for her coming here, all these cords of self-oblivion, which had hidden these things from her conscious mind, these cords were torn. They were the cords of self-oblivion torn. Like one who looks up to far height she saw, and suddenly, when these cords were torn, when Savitri began to look at herself, she found that far above her mind, she had thought that her mind was where everything rested, that's the source of her power. She said the mind was not the source of her power. Other other levels had, as it were, built up, other levels of consciousness is built up, and she was a supramental being. As we have seen, she had reached that stage already in Canto 5, Book 7. So she saw she has now to operate, she has now to function, not from the level of the mind as an ordinary being, but from levels beyond the mind. So she says, like one who looks up to far height, she saw, ancient and strong as on a windless summit, above her, where she had worked in her lone mind, laboring apart in a soul tower of self, the source of all which she had seemed or wrought. The source of all what she had done and what she is not the mind. This world is not a creation of the mind. See, that's the one mistake we all make, regarding the work as a creation of the mind. Regarding this world as a creation of the mind, this is not a creation of the mind, this is a creation of this supramental, a higher level of consciousness. Savitri is able to see this. The source of all she had seemed or wrought, a power projected into a cosmic space. She now feels that she is a power projected into cosmic space, a slow embodiment of the ionic will, a starry fragment of the eternal truth, the passionate instrument of an unmoved power. A presence was there that filled the listening world. A central all assumed her boundless life. She feels around her a presence. A presence was there that filled the listening world. A central all assumed her boundless life. A sovereignty, what kind of a power is it? The power represents a sovereignty, a silence, and a swiftness. One brooded over abysses. Who was she? She says the entire being was kind of controlled by this power, a sovereignty, a silence, and a swiftness. And this force that she feels around her now descends into Savitri and becomes a part of herself. As in a choric robe of unheard sounds, a force descended, trailing endless lights. As the force that she felt all around her began to descend into her, she had the experience that as the fold was descending into her, it left behind several trailing lights, trailing endless lights, linking time, seconds to infinity. At the moment when the force was coming into her, she felt her life's time was linked to eternity. Illimitably it girt the earth and her. It sank into her soul and she was changed. Complete change comes over Savitri. In other words, the Savitri, a little while ago, to whom Satyavan had come running, and on whose lap he breathed his last. And this Savitri, who is now turning, all this is preparatory before she turns to the god of death and takes note of his presence. She has not even done that. Before that, this tremendous change has come over Savitri. So the god of death is not confronting the ordinary mortal woman Savitri. This is a different, transformed Savitri, because suddenly, that because of her yoga, because of all the tapasya she had done, at this climactic moment, something possesses her, and that is described. What it is that possesses her, what kind of a power is it, and how does that power function? Is it a power unrelated? Is it simply a lone, simple, unrelated miracle? Are you and I connected with it? All these things Sri Aurobindo brings in and says this is not a miracle that just happens for miracle's sake. It had a central purpose, and that central purpose is ultimately to enable man to conquer death terrestrially. And this is the Savitri that you see. Then, like a thought fulfilled by some great word, that mightiness assumed a symbol form. Just as a thought sometimes wanders around looking for a proper expression. Sometimes you get a great thought, but you are puzzled about how to express it. What's a good word? What's a good phrase? I don't know whether you ever felt like that. You have an idea, but you're kind of casting about what's the right word for it. So this power, as it were, moved around a little bit, saying what will be a good form, a good symbolic form of that, and then like a thought fulfilled by some great word, that mightiness assumed a symbol form. This mightiness assumed a symbol form. I've always wondered why all these mightinesses do have to have a symbol form. Because if they don't, you and I won't understand them. We have no way of understanding unless they are all symbol forms. Saraswati has to come before us with a veena, etc., etc. You mean to say that Saraswati has a veena? It is for your sake and my sake she has taken this veena. That's the way that we can relate to her. All that gods do is to be able to make sense to our limited, dull-witted heads. So, this great power now takes a symbolic form. Her being's spaces quivered with its touch. This symbolic form, as it were, merges into Savitri. So as it gets into her, her being's spaces quivered with its touch. Every part of her being trembled as this presence was entering her being. It covered her as with immortal wings. As it were, a bird, a huge bird was covering her, protecting her with its wings. On its lips, the curve of the unuttered truth. A halo of wisdom's lightnings for its crown. This symbol form had this truth, sacred truth, unuttered truth on the lips, and a halo of wisdom's lightnings for its crown. It entered the mystic lotus in her head. It went right into the Sahasradala Padma right here. And there it sat. It entered the mystic lotus in her head, the 1,000-petal home of power and light. You and I find it very difficult to understand. Just imagine the poet. He had this experience and he must have wondered, how do I communicate it to people? And what great art must have gone into this. We are simply complaining we don't understand it enough. But what effort he must have made to bring it down to this level so that you and I can grasp it. This is his experience that he described, not his experience, as we all know. Mother has said in her writings that when Sri Aurobindo wrote some of these lines, the next morning she would come and read out those lines to her, and she very often found that they were just her experiences that were being recorded by Sri Aurobindo. That doesn't mean Sri Aurobindo, mother told Sri Aurobindo what exactly had happened to her. They said they were one in consciousness. And we very often treat that as a kind of hyperbole. It's a kind of way of saying things. It is not a way of saying things. It's real. He knew exactly what her experiences were. And that is why, just as when he wrote about the yoga of Ashwapati, he was able to draw on first hand on his experiences. When he was writing about the yoga of Savitri, He didn't send the first draft to the mother and say, see whether it is correct or you just correct it. He didn't do that. He could see exactly what the mother had gone through and was able to write about it. These are all her experiences. Immortal leader of our mortality, doer of our works and fountain of our words, invulnerable by time, omnipotent, it stood above her, calm, immobile, mute. Now this Savitri now was in control, as it were, represented this tremendous power, and now she turns to the god of death. And you can see she is, with all this, more than a match to whatever god of death has to confront her with. I think Rains have said I want to stop for the next half an hour. Maybe a good time for us to have a cup of tea and come back at 10:30. The concluding session of this present series will be held as it was done last year in Savitri Bhavan in Auroville. On the 5th, you will have, as usual, the morning session here, and then in the afternoon, probably between 2:30 and 3:30 or 3 to 4, I will announce it subsequently. The concluding session will be held in Savitri Bhavan. We are hoping on that day the rain gods will be merciful. So we will all sit there, because Savitri Bhavan has a building, a structure, but it can't hold more than about 100 people or 75 people. So last year it was held, we met outside the Savitri Bhavan, just behind the... I spoke at some length on this problem of the conquest of physical death and immortality, and I pointed out that it is do you hear me when I don't speak? Okay. The mystery of immortality, death, etc., because, as I said, on the face of it, this looks quite paradoxical, that here is a yoga, here are the greatest yogis the world has ever seen, who has made physical immortality the aim of yoga. Because there cannot be nothing more materialistic than this clinging to a body. The lowest qualification anybody has to have for spiritual life is this detachment from the physical body. But here is a yoga which makes that almost as the center and goal of yoga. So people are likely to be confused about this. And I said yesterday that immortality has been an age-long quest. All cultures have mythologies which talk about people who continue to live forever and ever, whether it is Western mythology or Eastern mythology. And I pointed out yesterday in the Indian Puranas we have at least 7 characters who are supposed to be immortal. But when everything is said and done, we have also imaginations which said Yudhishthir went to Swarga in body, in this body. I don't know what kind of body it was. And Vishwamitra tried to send Trishanku, but it didn't succeed because he didn't have the qualifications to go there, etc. We have all these stories, and these myths are not just empty myths. They have a lot of power behind it. It's the whole people's deepest aspirations are reflected in a myth. You know, it's not as if only the ancient people have myths. We also have myths. And the modern myths talk about our present dreams and our highest aspirations. We all know that what happens to James Bond can nothing but fiction, but we believe in it as ardently as people believed in Rama and Krishna. And however new series of James Bond movies come, we all go and watch them, because that represents something of the modern myth, of the Western myth of eternal youth, of a kind of cleverness which can never be defeated. And of course, in the good old days, the war between the two power blocks, etc., etc. The point I am trying to make is that it's not only the ancient people had myths, we also have myths. And the Savitri story we are talking about, as I pointed out yesterday, also originated as a Vedic myth. And the significance, as you can see, is found in the ancient prayer, Mrityor Mam Amrutam Gamayam. This whole prayer of immortality, this is there. And the real issue about mortality and immortality is not the physical body per se. I pointed out yesterday that the victory over death is possible only under two conditions. One, that there should be no egoistic attachment to the body. It's a very strange thing. Only when you don't have an attachment to the body, you qualify for triumph over body. As long as you are subject to attachment to the body, then you are not a candidate. The second thing, of course, is you should have no fear of death. If you have fear of death, then the death already has you under in its paw. So no fear of death, and secondly, no attachment to the body. And then we see, as I read out to you a few passages from Sri Aurobindo, as for immortality, it cannot come if there is attachment to the body. For it is only by living in the immortal part of oneself, which is unidentified with the body, and bringing down its consciousness and force into the cells, that it can come. There is something about us which is immortal, and only when we reach that thing within us and try to bring it down into the cells of our body, then only can we hope to be immortal, which means the first thing is to get there. The first thing is to realize that which is immortal in us, about which the Gita talked about which the Upanishads have always been talking about. There is that thing about which doesn't ever die. Fire doesn't burn, water doesn't drench, the air doesn't dry it up, weapons don't cleave it, it is unborn, it doesn't therefore die, etc., etc. That's something which no reason can establish. I don't think this can ever be established on the basis of reason. But it can be that it does not therefore mean it doesn't exist. It simply means it is not something as finite as reason would like it to be. But there are other parts of man which can be trained. See, the highest truth, as I have always been maintaining here, the highest truth at the level of the mind is that of the agnostics. To say, there may be a truth, but I don't have access to it, I don't know it. That's what the mind has to say honestly. I have tried, but I can't determine whether there is a God or there is no God, whether there is immortality or there is no immortality. This is a reasonable position, but one doesn't stop there, because mind is not the only instrument that consciousness has of understanding truth. There is another instrument, that is man's consciousness itself. Now this consciousness can be honed, can be trained, can be purified, can be made universal. And this process of dealing with one's consciousness, of making it wider and more universal and pure and so on, is this central idea behind yoga. Once again, yoga is these days associated with what the body does. What the body does, the control over body, etc., is a preliminary. That is necessary. But all that I am trying to say is yoga is what you do with your consciousness. And if that's done, then you can understand things like the immortality of the soul not through reason. You don't say, I soul is immortal because A, B, C, D, but you say soul is immortal because I feel it is immortal. I have felt it. It's a matter of experience. And that's what I read out to you yesterday, a passage from Sri Aurobindo where he says, the soul needs no proof of its rebirth any more than it needs the proof of its immortality. Once you have this experience, death to you is a falsehood. Death to you, if at all it exists, it's a passing minor episode. The real thing is life. And what has happened, because the fear we have of death, we have suppressed life and raised death into a god. This is what we have done. So it is partly our fear and partly our attachment to the physical body that has given death this importance. What is important, what is central about us is this immortal part of our being. And it is possible to reach there, and once you reach there, there is no way death can even touch you. You simply say, I don't know where death exists. Now, Sri Aurobindo talks about two kinds of immortality. This is where some people say, cause the rains, etc. yesterday night. I was talking about two kinds of immortality. One is the sense of timeless immortality and immortality in time. The timeless immortality means beyond this life of I am living and all the faculties I have and experiences I have, there is something about me, something essential about me which has remained unborn, which exists forever and ever and ever. I am basically that which the Gita talks about, which is what we call the immortal soul, etc. There is, if we concentrate on that, then there is a danger of you regarding this world which is now imperfect. By any standard, this world in which we live is imperfect, and people have not been able to bring it to any perfection yet. There is a danger of your saying, this world is imperfect compared with the immortality, with the bliss, with the truth that I am within. The without is a travesty. Without is a perversion. I don't want this. I don't want this ugliness. I don't want this imperfection. Let me therefore live in that experience of Sat, Chit and Ananda. This is all ugly, this is all imperfect. So Sri Aurobindo is suggesting, if you say this, then you are indirectly suggesting that in bringing about this creation, God made a cardinal mistake, cardinal error. Because before this world came, we were all part of the Satchidananda, we were all there at peace, etc. Then why did He decide to manifest Himself? So He has decided to manifest Himself because, as I said yesterday, the ultimate purpose of this manifestation is not to leave the world as it is today, imperfect in so many ways. This is only a passing stage. You see evil, you see pain, you see perfection. Sri Aurobindo doesn't deny any of these things. He does admit there is pain in the world, there is perfection in the world, there is sin in the world, there is error in the world. We are going through ignorance. But this is not a permanent feature of God's creation. This is a passing circumstance. We are going through a stage where these things, for reasons that He has explained in the Life Divine, have become necessary. And there will come a time when these conditions may not be necessary. At that time there won't be sin, there won't be error, there won't be death. And therefore it is not to his yoga, in his yoga, this disgust of life, trying to say that this is a terrible, terrible life, I would like to finish this chapter once for all and not come back here, is not a healthy attitude. Now for you to be able to say that, it's very easy to talk about it, to be able to say that, you need to have another kind of sense of immortality. And what is that? That is, you are becoming, my becoming is 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, I don't know how long it's going to be. It's a temporary phase. But during my period of becoming, I have no awareness of my immortality. But it is possible to cultivate a sense of immortality. I know I am a becoming in this phase, in this form, it is going to be X number of years, but these are not going to limit me. It's not as if after this I will be completely lost. So once again the same thing will come, that is, in being as well as in becoming, you are aware of your immortality. So if you have that, then each life, each episode is an adventure. Each life becomes an adventure of consciousness. You grow from one life to another life. One life, the circumstances are favorable for worldly success, for name and fame. It is not of your doing. It is the soul's choice. The soul decided to have these experiences, and therefore you are given these experiences. You are born in that particular place where these experiences, good education, good company, satsang, etc., came to you undeserved. It is the soul's choice. The soul wants another kind of growth, another kind of experience. The soul will make sure it will be born in circumstances where the kinds of experience it seeks are available to us. Now it is not limited by any of these things. In other words, we are not limited by our becoming. And we know even when we pass through life, this is only a temporary phase, this is a passing phase, this is a becoming of a infinite reality. I am a part of that infinite reality. These are the two things that Sri Aurobindo says have to be there. Otherwise, it is likely that once you realize you are immortal, you are stainless, you are deathless, your very nature is bliss, you will begin to hate this world. And he says, this is a terrible world and there is nothing I can do about it. Let me be here as long as God permits and do the best with a bad job, and the earlier I quit the better. That should not be the attitude. As long as you are alive, don't think of death. It is not your responsibility. It is not your business. It comes when it comes. It comes for a purpose. Later on you will see Sri Aurobindo in maintaining death is at the service of life. That's the thing to be realized. That's the thing to be understood. And we'll see what exactly Sri Aurobindo and the mother mean by that. Now this is where we were yesterday. This is the point we stopped at yesterday. I hope there won't be a mini storm somewhere. Now there is another point I would like to take at this moment, because the mother has referred to it. There is an assumption that the practice of yoga, while it enables you to amass spiritual experience, is not generally very helpful to the body. And some people, I won't name them, have said, just as when you take to yoga, it burns out your vasanas, your lust, your greed, your imperfections, ultimately your ego, it also takes away your body. It also takes away your physical life. Now, Sri Aurobindo, of course, denies this in one of his letters very clearly. He says, the practice of yoga cannot be the cause of an inevitable breakdown of health or of the final illnesses which bring about death. He says, this has nothing to do with yoga. In fact, through the proper use of yogic consciousness and yoga shakti, illnesses can be repelled from the body or cured, and even a predestined death delayed for a long period. If you have spiritual means at your disposal, you can even delay death, predestined death, for a long period of time. Well, as you know, when Sri Aurobindo was about to give up his body, his very close associates went to him and said, "Sir, why don't you do something about this illness? You have cured several people, but just by sankalpa matrena, and you cured yourself in the past of illnesses like this. Why don't you do it now?" He says, "I won't do it." Then somebody asked, "Why?" "Well, I can't tell you, because even if I did, you won't understand it." That's what he said. I won't go into analyzing this, what exactly it meant and so on, but the fact is, there is evidence in Sri Aurobindo's letters to suggest that yogic power can delay death and so on. Of course, that's not the main purpose of doing yoga, but it is not true that yoga necessarily weakens your body. However, it's a common observation, many people have observed it, that once you take to yoga seriously, then some disabilities of the body, which would not have perhaps befallen them under normal circumstances, begin to appear. How to account for this? And mother has a beautiful explanation for this. The mother doesn't deny this entirely and explains why sometimes it appears as if people who take to yoga suddenly begin to develop certain kinds of illnesses, a certain kind of imbalance in the body, and in trying to explain it, she is initiating something of a very great truth. We will develop it subsequently, and that in fact is the real cause of death. What is the real cause of death? We will come to a little later, but this is the initial idea is given here. She says, the whole world is in a process of progressive transformation. The whole creation is evolving towards perfection. Now the force that becomes operative in those who take up yoga helps them to speed up this process. Yoga is basically a process by which what would have normally happened in hundreds of years, you can bring it about in a shorter period of time. That was the great thing that Vivekananda said in one of his lectures. He said, in normal course, the development you would have experienced in 3 lives, once you take to yoga, it can be achieved in 3 years. It's a conscious acceleration of your evolution. That's what yoga basically is. And so now, I like this term conscious evolution, etc. Notice, this is a totally secular term. It has no Hindu connotations. Evolution is no Hindu term. If at all, it's a Christian term. It's a Western term. So what Sri Aurobindo has made it possible is for us to look at this entire enterprise in religion-free terms. See, religion is a great thing. It has helped many people. Many people will be helped in future, etc., etc. But it is not as if we can only make sense of all this in a religious framework. We can also make sense of it in a framework which is not necessarily religious. And therefore, yoga is better looked at as a process by which your inner growth is accelerated. That's what the mother is saying here. Okay.